10 military blunders that changed the world. Number 10. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest. In the autumn of 9 AD, the Roman governor of Germania, Publius Quinctilius Varus, was approached by Arminius, a trusted chieftain of the Cherusci. He explained that a rebellion was fermenting on the other side of the Teutoburg Wald. Varus wanted to quell the unrest before winter, and Arminius suggested a quick narrow path through the forest. The only problem was the uprising was made up and presented Varus as bait by the Cherusci. Despite being warned by Arminius' own father-in-law that his men were walking into an ambush, Varus made the mistake of pressing on regardless, right into the trap. After 3 days of vicious fighting in the heart of the forest, 3 legions and 6 cohorts of auxiliaries were almost completely wiped out. It was a huge blow to Roman confidence, and while Rome pursued a campaign of retaliation, she was forever wary of settling east of the Rhine. The massacre of Teutoburg Forest is still considered a factor in why Roman culture and language, which still defines southern Europe, is missing from the north. Number 9. Dunkirk. After Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, the British Expeditionary Force was dispatched to France in May 1940, in much the same way it had 25 years before. However, the German Wehrmacht had learnt from 1918, and within 3 weeks the Allied armies had been pushed back to the port town of Dunkirk. Almost 400,000 French and British soldiers were trapped and awaiting the final push, which never came. On the 23rd of May, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt ordered a general halt, which was endorsed by Hitler. The following day, the 24th of May, the Führer ordered no one to attack the beaches, save for the Luftwaffe. Hitler wanted to save the tanks for future operations and believed that Britain would sue for peace after defeat in France. Unfortunately for him, the delay in attack allowed the French to establish a rear guard, while the British arranged a strategic evacuation. When Hitler resumed the advance, it was too late. Over the course of the 8-day evacuation, 338,226 Allied soldiers were evacuated, allowing Britain to stay in the war. In control of North Africa and India, the UK denied the access vital resources and would eventually be the launchpad for the invasion of Fortress Europe. Hitler's pause at Dunkirk sowed the seeds of his own downfall. Number 8. Red Cliffs. The year is 208, and China is in a state of civil war. The Han dynasty, led by the weak Emperor Xian, had been fractured into 3 warring states: Wei, Wu, and Shu. Dominant among these was Wei, led by Chancellor Xiao Xiao, who waged war to reunify China under his ultimate control. Key to Xiao Xiao's strategy was control of the Yangtze River, and it was at a place called Chibi, otherwise known as the Red Cliffs, that Sun Xuan of Shu and Liu Bei of Wu faced him. Xiao Xiao had a host of 240,000 men on ships compared to the alliance's 50,000. But the men of Wei were apparently not used to naval warfare, which Xiao Xiao solved by chaining the ships together. This made them exceptionally vulnerable to fire ships, which of course Shu and Wu deployed en masse. The chained ships couldn't escape in time, burning or drowning the huge army, and leaving Xiao Xiao's campaign in tatters. Wei would never recover from their defeat, and Chibi would mark the beginning of the end for Emperor Xian and the Han dynasty. The battle also prevented northern domination of the south, leading to a cultural and occasionally political divide that lasted centuries. Number 7. Stalingrad. Okay, this one is convoluted, so here's the simple version. Following the defeat in the Battle of Britain in 1940, Hitler turned his attention east towards the Soviet Union. On the 22nd of June 1941, Operation Barbarossa was launched, hoping for a quick, decisive victory to knock out the Russians once and for all. This alone was a huge mistake, for as weak as the Soviet army was, the expectation that Russia could be taken before winter was optimistic at best. The army was not fully prepared for the cold, with weapons, fuel and men freezing without proper weatherproofing. Then, in December 1941, Hitler assumed full control of the German army and decided to turn attention from Moscow to Stalingrad. By July 1942, as Soviet resistance in the city grew, Hitler personally rewrote objectives to divert more resources towards Stalingrad. The battle was becoming one of attrition, something Germany couldn't win. With the encirclement of the German Sixth Army in January 1943, Hitler made one more stupid decision and ordered the army to make no attempt at breakout. The battle depleted resources that the Wehrmacht could ill afford, breaking their ability to do battle and paving the way to Berlin. Number 6. The fall of Constantinople. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire had been pushed back to the walls of Constantinople itself. The Ottomans, under Sultan Mehmed II, lay siege to the city in April and battered the great walls of the city with artillery for 53 straight days. The walls of Constantinople had weathered Huns, Russians, and Arab attacks before, and were considered strong enough to defeat this latest assault. And they might have, had, according to contemporary chroniclers, someone remembered to lock the Kirkaporta gate. On the 29th of May 1453, on seeing the undefended gate, 50 Ottomans rushed in and raised their standard over the walls. The exhausted defenders, believing the walls were taken, fell back into the city in a panic, and Constantinople was taken. Not only did this lead to the fall of the Roman world, but allowed the Ottomans to launch further attacks into Europe. This would lead to the partitioning of the Balkans along religious lines, something we're still experiencing the effects of today. However, it would also result in Byzantine scholars fleeing to the wealthy courts of Italy and France, kickstarting the Renaissance. Number 5. The Bay of Pigs. On the 17th of April 1961, 1,500 CIA-trained Cubans landed in the Bay of Pigs, with the intention of overthrowing the unsteady Castro regime. However, President John F. Kennedy was desperate to maintain deniability and refused to back up any Cuban invasion with American troops or meaningful air support. This was the first mistake. The second was, before the force had even landed, a team of trigger-happy frogmen scouted the bay and inadvertently alerted the Cuban authorities. By the time the main CIA force arrived, most of the Cuban army was on the way. By the 19th of April, Kennedy at last authorized air support for the beleaguered CIA, bombers from Nicaragua and fighters from an aircraft carrier near Florida. Except they took off from different time zones, and no one had bothered to synchronize watches. The bombers arrived an hour early, with no support whatsoever, and 2 B-26s were shot down. With dwindling supplies and no air cover, the remaining CIA forces quickly surrendered and were ransomed back to the US for $59 million. Far from toppling Castro, the invasion strengthened his regime and would directly lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Number 4. Naxos. It's 499 BC, and the island of Naxos in the Aegean Sea has declared independence from the Persian Empire. A local Persian administrator, Aristagoras, has borrowed a vast amount of money, men and ships from Emperor Darius' brother and sailed to reclaim the island. Problem was that Aristagoras was an unlikable guy and quarrelled so much with the admiral of the fleet, Megabates, that Megabates decided to sabotage the siege. He sent word to Naxos that a fleet was coming, and they managed to repel Aristagoras' invasion. Returning to Persia with his tail between his legs, Aristagoras decided that instead of waiting to be dismissed, he'd instigate his own rebellion. After all, it worked for Naxos. The Ionian Revolt, as it became known, lacked the power to defeat Persia in the field, and so called in Athens and Eretria for support. The revolt was eventually put down, but Darius was now intent on punishing Athens, previously ignored by the Persians. 50 years of Greco-Persian wars ensued, serving to forge Greek identity and culture. Everything we regard as ancient Greek was crystallized as anti-Persian and marked a clear divide between East and West. Because of one man's inability to make friends, later Western cultures such as Rome adopted Grecian culture, which would influence the West for millennia to come. Number 3. The Battle of Trenton. By winter 1776, George Washington's Continental Army was looking at defeat. Suffering from poor morale and British victories, desertion was high, and Washington needed a decisive victory to prevent complete disintegration. He settled on attacking Trenton in New Jersey. However, his army happened to be on the wrong side of the Delaware River. Washington's force of 2,500 men was pretty difficult to miss, and on spying the build-up, one loyalist ran to warn the Hessian garrison. However, the date was the 25th of December, 1776, and the Hessian colonel Johann Rau had left instructions not to be disturbed. Sensing he wouldn't get to see the colonel anytime soon, the loyalist scrawled a note in English and asked for it to be passed on. For whatever reason though, Rau failed to read the note, either because he couldn't understand the English or because he was too busy. The following morning, Washington attacked, taking the garrison completely by surprise. Rau died with the unread note still in his pocket. The victory boosted morale, and the following spring saw the Continental Army swell with recruits. The larger army bought time for the Spanish, French and Dutch to effectively bankrupt Britain into submission. If Rau had read the note in time, perhaps America would be a British colony to this day. Number 2. Hiroshima. In July 1945, Japan's looming defeat was obvious to just about everyone except Japan's military. A determined army could still inflict thousands of casualties before the end, So, in an effort to avert this, the Potsdam Conference issued an ultimatum: either surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. When asked for a response by reporters, Japan's Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki responded with the phrase mokusatsu. Now, this term can either mean remain wisely silent or inactive, or the more aggressive, to treat with contempt. An unknown US translator is thought to have only provided one meaning to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the negative one. 10 days later, a bomb is dropped on Hiroshima that kills 70,000 in an instant. But who's to blame? The translator? The US military for bombing anyway? Or Suzuki for being ambiguous? It isn't clear, and many believe there were other reasons to drop an atomic bomb. But this account suggests that an era of atomic threats and thousands of lives hinged on one simple mistranslation. However, this was not the first bloodshed due to a language barrier. Number 1. The Battle of Jumonville Glen. Before the American Revolution, the British and French had been antagonizing each other in the New World for decades. The French would claim land, and the Brits would build a fort on it. Everyone got angry. In 1754, the British sent a young officer called George Washington to Pennsylvania to protect Fort Necessity. It was during this tour of duty that on the 27th of May 1754, Washington attacked without prevarication a French patrol, killing their commander Joseph Coulon de Villiers-Jumonville. Naturally, Jumonville's brother Louis wanted revenge, and with a force of 700 men captured Washington's shiny new fort. Vastly outnumbered, Washington was forced to surrender and signed a document allowing him and his men to withdraw. Except Washington couldn't read French, which meant he couldn't read what he was signing. Washington had inadvertently admitted to assassinating Jumonville. When news of this reached London and Paris, it caused severe deterioration in relations, leading ultimately to war in 1756. The 7 Years' War, as it became known, involved almost every European country, spanned the globe, and led directly to the American and French revolutions. All that bloodshed because George couldn't read French. So that was 10 military blunders that changed the world. Which one do you think had the biggest impact? Let us know in the comments below, and if you like this video, check out 10 weapons that changed the world on screen now.